Teutoburg forced. This might not say a lot to the common man about either the Roman Empire or anything, but this is where one of the greatest defeats of the Roman Empire would take place against the Germanic tribes. Now if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, a comment and a subscription, as this helps put my videos out there and boost the YouTube algorithm. Now let's begin. This happened when the Roman Empire was only 36 years old, and it just came out of a gruesome civil war which Octavianus was able to win. Now, when you look at the Roman Empire, you might think, oh wow, this is a really cool and glorious empire, which it really is, but this was going to be one of their greatest defeats, and we're gonna talk about it. To the north of Rome lay Germania, a land that Rome was never able to fully conquer. In hindsight, the region may not have been particularly valuable in monetary value, but the constant raids from the Germanic tribes proved to be a constant thorn in Rome's side. Eventually, Germanic tribes would be partially responsible for the downfall of the Western Roman Empire in year 476. Anyhow, let's get back to Augustus. Augustus was one of the greatest emperors the Roman Empire would have, and under him the Roman Empire would see one of the greatest expansions the Roman Empire would have in its entire lifetime, only eclipsed by Hadrian, who was ruling around 80 to 100 years after him. One of the regions he wanted to take control of was Egypt, which he took in 31 BC after defeating Mark Antony. But another region was also Germania. Germania would have a lot of different tribes in it, so when they were able to field a temporary alliance under the rule of Arminius, it was quite a surprise. Partially because the tribes would also have war between themselves quite often, so them being able to form a fragile temporary alliance, especially when the Romans suffered a serious defeat to that alliance, was quite a big surprise for them. For a lot of countries right now and back then, a defeat like Teutoburg Forest would be the end of the country. And as a republic and an empire, the Roman Empire had to endure a lot of defeats like these, for example at the Battle of Cannae. However, if you are a united republic or empire, and you would have a unified economy, and you would have one strong leader and of course the manpower pool, you could rebuild your army and try again. I mean, just look at the Second Punic War, where the Romans had lost a lot of troops against Hannibal and eventually were able to defeat Hannibal with Scipio Africanus. While if you don't have unity, like for example the Celts had or the Germanics in this case, yeah, you can win a couple of battles, push the Romans back, maybe even lose them a couple of legions, but when you suffer a catastrophic defeat, because knowing the Romans eventually they will find a way, it's very hard to recover and you might find yourself subjugated. The Romans would see themselves as superior to the Germanics, to the point that they would even name the Germanic tribes barbarics. This was quite normal for the time. The Romans would consider themselves the best in the world, as most tribes and empires would do for that time. However, this wasn't down to genetics or how someone looked for the Romans, it was down to the civic state of someone. If they managed to get citizenship, they were just Romans and not inferior anymore. But, however, until they came to that point, the Romans would consider them half-beasts. The war between the Romans and the Germanics wasn't anything new. The Romans at this point were fighting the Germanics for a century now, and even Julius Caesar would have 2 expeditions across the Rhine River. And the Germanic tribes themselves would also launch expeditions into Gallia, but also into Italy itself. So the Romans would decide that enough was enough and they wanted to inflict a serious defeat upon the Germanics. Germania would be unlike anything the Romans would see in Italy. Because Italy is of course a Mediterranean country, Germania would be wet, they would be foggy, it would be cold, it would be muddy and a lot more. Unlike anything the Romans had seen in their quite pleasant Mediterranean climate. So as early as 12 BC, Augustus began a series of campaigns to defeat the tribes and unite all of Germania into a single province, Germania Magna. During Roman military campaigns, they often would try to create these colonia in conquered territories, slowly integrating these territories into the Roman Empire, language-wise and culture-wise. Arminius is the son of a leading member of one of these tribes, and he is caught up in the Roman expansion in Germania. So let's rewind a bit. Arminius grew up as a Roman noble hostage, and often what would happen to these noble hostages was that they would get a respect for the Roman Empire, seeing how big it is, how it works, its culture and more. And so did Arminius. He was able to speak fluent Latin and sometimes served as a messenger between the Romans and the Germanic tribes. Arminius actually had the honorary rank of eques, so when Arminius reported a supposed rebellion, Varus would believe this report, not knowing the treachery Arminius planned. One man actually had suspected the treachery of Arminius, and the man was rival chieftain Segestes, who had asked Varus to arrest Arminius and his co-conspirators, but this request was promptly ignored. On the first day of marching to the northwest of Germany, Arminius had asked if he could leave the Roman army behind and gather all of the Roman Germanic allies in the region. This request was granted. Now, when Arminius did that, instead he actually gathered 6 tribes to ambush the Romans at Teutoburg forest. The second day they were marching again, through a heavily forested and muddy terrain. The Roman military force, which was there, was roughly 20,000 men. This is 3 legions, and these legions were the 17th, the 18th, the 19th legion. Meanwhile, the Germanics were waiting for them behind a series of fortifications. And then out of nowhere, javelins and fire arrows started flying into the Roman column. Some Germanic warriors were barreling down the hill to fight with the Romans, and because of this surprise and the unfavorable terrain, they weren't able to take up proper defensive formations. Due to the defensive structures which were there, the Romans were unable to form a strong fist against the Germanic forces, and a large portion of the Roman column was shattered that day. As you can guess, the Romans were retreating towards the west again, and on the third day they were ambushed once more, suffering heavy losses because the cavalry and the infantry collided with each other in their efforts to coordinate an attack. On the fourth day, Varus led the shattered survivors along a familiar road in the valley of the Ems. Worsening rains and violent winds are said to have affected the fighting capabilities of the already exhausted soldiers, while the Germanic tribes were pursuing them. Understanding that total defeat was inevitable, Varus and his officers committed suicide. Many of the Roman soldiers followed their leaders, others surrendered and others attempted to flee, with only a few escaping into the safety of their provinces. Having received the news of the battle, Augustus went months without cutting his beard or hair as a sign of mourning in Roman religious traditions, and often said, "Varus, give me back my legions." Out of fear, Augustus also pulled back a lot of legions in Germania and formed a new border at the Rhine River. Meanwhile, while this was happening, Germanicus was advancing through the Roman ranks, and by 13 AD, at 28 years old, he was governor of Gallia. This would also put him in command of so 40,000 legionaries. Before Augustus would have the chance to see his vengeance realized on the Germanic tribes, he would pass away after being more than 40 years on the throne of being the emperor of the Roman Empire. Augustus, his successor, Tiberius, gave Germanicus considerable freedom to act out his vengeance against the Germanic tribes. And so, during the autumn of 14 AD, Germanicus would lead a vengeful campaign into Germania in search of fallen legions. He would come upon each of the points at which Varus's columns had been attacked and bury the remains of the dead. Also in 14 AD, Germanicus would massacre the entire village of the Marsus, which was a Germanic tribe. The legionaries also killed and put everything on fire in an 80-kilometer radius. When the Romans wanted to go west of the Rhine again, they were caught up by a tribe who wanted revenge, but they were able to make it across the Rhine without any major casualties. In 15 AD he would go on another expedition, and this time it was to go after the Chatti. After the Romans had burned the capital place to the ground, they were requested help from Segestes. He, Segestes, tried to warn the Romans about the ambush in 9 AD, but this warning was ignored. This time Segestes needed the help of the Roman Empire, because Arminius' warriors were besieging him. Germanicus went to provide aid and scared away Arminius' warriors, and this was good news because Segestes was actually holding Thrusenelda captive, and this was the wife of Arminius. When Arminius heard the news that his wife was captured by the Romans, he once more was able to rally the leaders behind him. After nearly 3 years of campaigning in Germania, he would finally get the chance of vengeance during the Battle of Edistaviso. Arminius and Germanicus would face off in a brutal battle, and for Germanicus this was about revenge. The Germanic forces would advance, with loud war cries, and meanwhile Germanicus would order the cavalry to advance and order them to attack from the flanks. When the Germanics were advancing, the legionaries threw their javelins and proceeded to advance with drawn swords. Meanwhile the archers were firing upon the unshielded Germanic warriors. The first overconfident Germanic warriors were getting pushed back by the legionaries, meanwhile they got flanked by the Roman cavalry. So panic started to break out under the Germanic warriors. Some tried to flee in the forest while others stayed behind. After the defeat at Edistaviso, Arminius did not want to give up and tried to reorganize an army. He attempted another battle against the Romans, and Germanicus, pretending he walked into the trap of the Germanics, was able to catch them off guard with his cavalry. Germanicus would lead the charge himself, also 2,000 legionaries. He ordered them to spare no one, and so they did. The Germanic defense would collapse and Arminius would flee by horse. Germanicus had never seen Arminius since, and Rome would get its revenge it so desperately wanted after the Battle of Teutoburg forest. Germanicus died 19 AD and Arminius died in 21 AD after being assassinated by his own followers of his own tribe. Hey guys, this is the end of the video. Make sure to leave a like, a comment and a sub if you enjoyed the video, considering it helps boost the algorithm and spreads my content out there. I really hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.